То есть, как начал Джеффри Кол, Джеффри, руководитель всемирного интернет-проекта, проекту более 10 лет, проект работает в 35 странах мира. Ну и основная цель проекта, каким образом технологии интернета влияют на нашу жизнь, влияют на политику, на социальные наши отношения, на семейные ценности, вообще на все ценности. Слово Джеффри Кол.
Thank you, Anton. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here. This is my second visit to Russia. I promise, if I wasn't sure the first time I'd be invited back, now that I'm here the second time, I promise that if I am invited back, I will learn some Russian. Anyway, my welcome has been so warm, and I've been asked to talk about some internet trends and developments. So before I do that, inside, I'm not going to use PowerPoint. I hope that's okay. So we can keep the lights on. Before I share some of what we see as key trends around the world, let me take about 3 minutes and tell you about the work I do, so that you can understand where my data, my insights come from. I'm an old television guy. I've spent most of my life in and around television, the most powerful medium ever invented. And in the work I did in television, I was always taught that we blew it where television was concerned. We lost a great opportunity. And what I mean by that is television, if you think about it, is the only mass medium we knew ahead of time was going to be a mass medium. There was no question in the 40s or 50s that radio listeners were going to embrace radio with pictures. We knew television was going to be a phenomenon before the first signal was ever broadcast. So what I was taught that we should have done but didn't do is we should have tracked people before they had television and then gone back to them year after year as they acquired and used television to see how it changed their lives. And if we had done that, we would have learned some pretty compelling things, starting with easy questions like, where did the time for television come from? When Russians, Americans, Japanese, other Europeans were watching 3 hours of television a day, and we were asked, where did that time come from? What were we doing less of? We didn't know. We just grabbed that time out of the air. We could have learned that the time for television came from talking as a family, reading books or newspapers, sleep, or from some other place. And I became convinced in the 90s that the impact of digital technology, first the web and now mobile, was going to be far more powerful than television. Everybody has their own example of when they realized the internet was going to change the world. My example came working with the American broadcast networks in the 90s, and they showed me research they still don't like to talk about, that showed that beginning in 1998, for the first time in the history of at least American television, kids under the age of 14 were starting to watch less television. First time they had ever been drawn away from television, and the explanation was singularly computers and the internet. And that spoke to me in hugely powerful terms. If this technology could draw kids away from television, the most powerful medium ever invented, then something hugely important was going on. So believing that we lost a great opportunity to understand the impact of television, and believing that the impact of digital, first the web and now mobile, was going to be far more powerful than television, 11 years ago we launched this massive project. This tracking of digital that we thought should have been conducted of television in the 40s. We started in the United States. We've gone back to the same people 11 years in a row. We've watched as non-users moved to dial-up, as dial-up users migrated to broadband. We saw almost immediately broadband changed everything, not because of the speed, but it's the always-on, the direct connection that changes the whole relationship to the web. We watch as about 2% globally drop off the web each year. We want to know who are these people who leave and why, and more importantly, do they return, and if so, when, and what brings them back? And then 11 years in, we track the never users. Who are the people who have never gone online and why? How do they do the things offline the rest of us do online? And increasingly a question we're starting to ask in the developed world, should we care that they're non-users? Should we be twisting their arms, persuading them to go online? Or should we let them live their lives peaceably and happily unconnected? We started this work in the U.S. We're now doing it in 34 countries throughout the world. We're doing this throughout Europe, Asia, Latin America, increasingly in Africa. And I'm sad to say we had a Russian partner. I came here 4 years ago to find a Russian partner, but they have run out of funding and run into problems. So I would welcome the opportunity. We can't be a world internet project without Russia being part of it. Having said that, let me share some of what we see as trends over the last 11 years, and let me build on some of the great ideas that came out of Scott's presentation that just flew by. I was looking at my watch and I thought it was 10, 15 minutes, and we were about 40 minutes into it. But picking up on one of his last themes, one of the big themes we see is screen time is exploding. In 1975, in the developed world, we spent 16 hours a week in front of the screen. Now that screen was a screen in the home on a schedule, a television set. And television, if you think about it, couldn't grow until now. Because most of us turn on the television set the moment we enter the home, leave it on till we go to sleep. Some of us go to sleep with the television on, and some of us leave it on when we're not at home so that people think we are at home. Television time couldn't grow. Already, if we find time at home to do anything, it comes from television. If we want to take a walk, take a nap, take a shower, it comes from television. Television couldn't grow until it escaped from the home, and that's what television's doing now. Now, television barely ever existed outside the home. The exception was the hospital, but if you're sick, that's your home. The bar, for some people, that's their home. But now we're going to be watching television at the airport, waiting for flights, on the airplane itself, in the back seat of our cars, hopefully not the front seat while we're driving. Television time is increasing. And our work shows definitively, and I don't use words like definitively very often, our work's shown for 3 or 4 years that people will watch television on small screens in their pockets in purses. And not just 2-minute sports clips or movie trailers, but we see people watching 30, 60, 90-minute shows on their mobile phones. Keep in mind that at the same time as we're putting these little screens in our pockets and purses, we're putting bigger and better screens in our homes than we ever have before. The gap between the home and the theater is narrower than it's ever been. The time gap is shorter, and we will save our preferred content for the big screen. I did a talk at the Cannes Lions Awards last year, and there was a Canadian in the audience and raised his hand and said, I'm a Canadian and I'm a big hockey fan, which is pretty redundant if you think about it. And he said, why would I ever watch a hockey game on a mobile phone? And the answer is, if you love hockey, you won't. You'll seek out the biggest and best screen you can find, unless you can't get to a big screen, and it's more important to see it sooner rather than later. Then you'll watch it on a mobile phone. But we see people watching on the first screen, the second screen, the third screen. We said television's escaping from the home, and television's becoming our constant companion. Who's our constant companion now? If we're stuck at the airport waiting for a flight, most of us don't pull out books or newspapers. We pull out our mobile phones and start calling people. It's only after someone answers do we figure out whether we really have anything we want to say to them. My mother figured this out a long time ago. Whenever I call my mother, she'll say, what, you're stuck somewhere? You have nothing better to do than to call me? And she's right, but she also figured out, hey, it means we get to talk more. Television's going to become our constant companion, the thing that accompanies us everywhere. We spent 16 hours a week in front of a screen in 1975. Last year, we spent 36 hours a week in front of a screen. And we think those 36 hours are going to be over 50 hours in the next 4 to 5 years. We know with teenagers, there's practically not a moment of their lives that they're not in front of a screen, with the exception of when they're in school and when they're asleep. And I'm not so sure teenagers aren't in front of a screen when they're in school. They certainly are during lunch and recess, and I think more of them are than we'd like to admit in front of a screen during class. And we know that 80% of teenagers sleep within arm's length of their mobile phones. You ask them why they sleep next to their mobile phones, and they'll tell you it's their alarm clocks. And we learned, and we all know now, 8, 9 years ago, teenagers aren't wearing watches, and now the entire jewelry industry, not to mention the economy of Switzerland, is waiting to the answer to the question, will they start wearing watches? The evidence is pretty clear they're not. We've also seen, where screen time is concerned, a really interesting phenomenon the last 2 years, and you touched on this in your presentation, Scott. We've seen the ratings for live events climb. In America, our Super Bowl this year had the highest ratings of any television show in our history. It took since 1983 to break that record. The ratings for the World Cup, the ratings, especially sports events, but also things like our Oscars in America and Grammys and Emmys, but live events. And the reason we think we're seeing the ratings for live events are people co-viewing, although we've always co-viewed with other people, they would sit in the living room with us, but co-viewing through social networking. People who are co-viewing who aren't in the same place